Hey everyone, and welcome back. Today we're diving into something, well, pretty heavy, but really important, especially for, folks like you interested in autism.
Yeah, absolutely.
We're looking at this article from cheapaba.com, and it's called Autism and Human Trafficking, a Hidden Epidemic.
Oh, wow.
So, knowledge is power, right?
Yeah.
So let's dig into, why autistic people are, well, more vulnerable and what we can do.
Yeah, for sure. It's definitely a topic that needs more attention.
Yeah.
It's this connection between autism and this, well, horrible crime is often overlooked.
Yeah. And this article starts with a statistic that's, well, kind of alarming.
Okay.
It says autistic individuals are 3 times more likely to be victims of human trafficking than, the general population.
Well,
Before we go any further, can you just give us a clear picture of what exactly is human trafficking?
yeah, you're right. That statistic is, well, it's a wake-up call. So human trafficking is basically, modern day slavery. It's like it involves using force, fraud, or coercion to exploit people, for labor or for commercial sex. It's a global issue, and sadly, it preys on those who are vulnerable. And like we're saying, people on the autism spectrum are, well, they're often targeted.
Wow, so 3 times more likely. It's disturbing that this is even, happening. The article talks about why autistic individuals are, well, more susceptible.
Yeah.
What are some of those key factors?
Well, one major factor is, many autistic people have difficulty with like interpreting social cues.
Okay.
And this can make them more susceptible to manipulation by traffickers. Traffickers are experts at deception and coercion.
Right.
So someone who struggles to read like facial expressions or body language, they might miss those subtle warning signs.
Yeah, like they're missing some of the warning signals that most people would just instinctively pick up on. It really makes you realize how important those social cues are.
Yeah, for sure. Another key factor is, well, communication barriers.
Okay.
Many autistic individuals have difficulty expressing their needs and boundaries.
Right.
And this can make it harder to resist exploitation or even to, report it if it's happening.
That's a good point. If you're struggling to articulate what's going on or how you feel, it's going to be much harder to get help.
Exactly.
Even if you know something is wrong.
Exactly. And then you have social isolation, which is, well, unfortunately common for many autistic people. And this isolation increases their risk of being targeted because, well, traffickers often prey on individuals who seem to lack strong social support systems.
It's like they're looking for people who might slip through the cracks, who might not have those close connections that could protect them or raise the alarm if something seems off.
Precisely. And, while this isn't unique to autism, many autistic individuals find connection, and community online.
Right.
And this can make them vulnerable to, well, to online grooming tactics that traffickers use.
Yeah, that online world can be tricky. It's like a double-edged sword, right? It offers connection, especially for those who feel isolated offline,
Yeah.
but it also creates these opportunities for exploitation. So how does that online grooming actually work?
Well, traffickers might join, online communities frequented by autistic individuals, and they'll pose as peers to gain their trust.
Mm.
They might offer compliments or gifts or even promises of, friendship or romance.
Wow.
And over time, they manipulate that trust to, exploit the individual, maybe for like sexually explicit content or financial gain, or even to lure them into, a face-to-face meeting where they could become victims of trafficking.
That's really scary. It's like they're exploiting that, desire for connection, which can be especially strong for someone who might be feeling isolated or misunderstood in the offline world. This is all just so disturbing to think about. And sadly, the consequences of human trafficking for, autistic individuals can be even more devastating. I mean, it goes way beyond just the obvious physical dangers.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. The trauma itself can have a profound impact on their mental health. We're talking about high rates of PTSD, anxiety, depression among, survivors.
Yeah, and that 70% statistic about exploitation among autistic adults it's alarming. It makes you wonder what types of exploitation are most prevalent and how much goes unreported because of, those communication challenges we talked about.
It's a sobering thought for sure,
Mm.
and it makes you realize how important it is to understand, the long-term impact on these individuals. The trauma can be compounded by, the very nature of autism itself. sensory sensitivities,
Mm.
communication differences, social anxieties. All of these can make the experience of trauma even more intense and, well, and long-lasting,
It's like layers upon layers of trauma,
right?
and it really emphasizes the need for like specialized support.
Exactly. If the support systems aren't, tailored to the unique needs of autistic individuals, there's a real risk of re-traumatization.
Mm.
Imagine like an autistic survivor being interviewed by law enforcement who
Mhm.
aren't, who aren't trained to understand the nuances of autistic communication.
Right.
Attempts to like self-soothe might be misinterpreted as uncooperative or even, deceptive.
That's heartbreaking. It's like they're being victimized again, by a system that's supposed to help them. But I'm glad this article doesn't just leave us with this like sense of despair. It highlights things we can all do to like combat this problem.
Yes, that shift to action is, well, it's critical. Awareness is that first step,
Okay.
but it needs to lead to tangible change.
Okay, so the article it lays out these three key areas: awareness, support, and accessibility. Let's break those down, one by one, starting with awareness. Like, why is simply knowing about this issue so important? What can we do with that knowledge?
Well, awareness is the foundation,
Yeah.
for action. The more people understand this, heightened vulnerability, the better equipped we are to to recognize those warning signs
Right.
and intervene when necessary
Right.
and advocate for, for better protections.
So it's not just about like feeling informed. It's about being able to like spot potential problems in our, communities or schools or workplaces, like wherever we interact with autistic individuals.
Yeah,
It's about being, proactive.
exactly. Awareness also helps dispel those, those harmful myths and stereotypes
Right.
that can further marginalize autistic individuals,
Right.
making them, more susceptible to exploitation.
You're right. Those stereotypes can be so damaging. The more we understand about autism, the better we can challenge those misconceptions and
Right.
create a more inclusive and supportive environment. But awareness alone isn't enough. We also need to talk about, support. What does that look like in the context of, human trafficking?
Well, support goes beyond simply providing access to, generic mental health services.
Okay.
It's about creating, specialized autism-informed support networks. Think therapists, counselors, and advocates,
Right.
trained in trauma-informed care
Right.
who have a deep understanding of, of autism.
So it's about ensuring that those resources are truly accessible
Yeah,
and relevant to their needs, like meeting them where they are.
precisely. And this ties into, that third key area, accessibility. If we want to reduce vulnerability,
Hmm.
we need to advocate for greater inclusion and participation in all aspects of, society.
Yeah.
That means education, employment, and social opportunities.
That makes a lot of sense. If someone feels like they, belong, like they have purpose and connection, they're less likely to be, isolated and targeted.
Exactly. We need
Mhm.
to, we need to challenge those systemic barriers that exclude autistic individuals
Right.
and create a society where everyone, has the opportunity to thrive.
Yeah.
That means advocating for accessible education,
Okay.
inclusive workplaces,
Yeah.
welcoming social environments.
That's a powerful message. It's not just about like preventing trafficking.
Right.
It's about creating a world where autistic individuals are, valued, respected, and integrated into our communities, breaking down those barriers that lead to isolation.
Yeah.
So thinking about my own like sphere of influence,
Yeah.
my workplace, for example, what are some, tangible things I could do to promote accessibility?
That's a great question and a perfect example of, turning awareness into action. Maybe you could suggest like a training session on autism awareness for your, colleagues,
Okay.
or advocate for like sensory-friendly spaces in the workplace. Even small changes like, using clear and concise language in communication, that can make a big difference.
Those are great ideas. It's really about being, mindful and proactive in our everyday interactions.
Exactly. It's about each of us taking responsibility and, you know, looking for those opportunities to make a difference.
This has been a real eye-opener for me, I have to admit. I didn't realize just how vulnerable, autistic individuals are to human trafficking. It's scary but also motivating.
Yeah.
Makes me want to learn more and be more aware of what's going on around me.
And that's exactly what, this deep dive is all about.
Yeah.
Equipping ourselves with the knowledge to be, more effective advocates and allies.
Speaking of knowledge, I wanted to go back to that statistic. 70% of autistic adults report experiencing some form of exploitation.
Mhm.
That's just, it's mind-boggling. It makes you wonder how much goes, undetected.
Yeah.
How many people are suffering in silence.
It's a sobering thought. It highlights the need for greater vigilance
Yeah.
and awareness. We need to be attuned to those subtle signs
Right.
that something might be,
Bro.
wrong.
What kind of signs should we look for? What are some red flags that might indicate that someone's being exploited or trafficked?
That's a great question.
Hmm.
It's important to remember there's no
Hmm.
single profile of a trafficking victim.
Okay.
It can happen to anyone,
Right.
regardless of age, gender, or, background.
Yeah.
But there are some general warning signs.
Like give me some specifics. I want to be able to recognize this.
Well, sudden changes in behavior, that's a red flag.
Mm.
If someone who's once, outgoing becomes withdrawn and isolated,
Hmm.
or if their mood shifts dramatically,
Yeah.
that could be a sign that something's, wrong.
Okay, so changes in behavior. Got it. What else?
Unexplained injuries, signs of malnourishment,
Okay.
sudden change in,
Mhm.
their style of dress,
Right.
particularly if it seems, inappropriate for their age or the situation.
Right.
Those are all things to pay attention to.
I imagine it's even harder to pick up on these signs in someone who's, autistic. Given those communication and social difficulties we've talked about, how do you even begin to untangle that?
It's definitely a challenge. That's why it's so crucial to be familiar with the individual's baseline behavior
Right.
and communication patterns.
Okay.
What might seem like a minor quirk could actually be a sign of,
Distress. So it's about paying attention to those subtle shifts, those things that just seem a little off, trusting our gut instincts if something feels, wrong. But what if you're not sure? Who do you even contact? This all feels so overwhelming.
You're right. It can be overwhelming. That's why organizations like the National Autism Association, the Polaris Project,
Okay.
and the Autistic Self-Advocacy Network, these are so important. They provide resources, support, and guidance for, individuals, families, and professionals. We'll be sure to include links to their websites in the show notes.
Yes, definitely. It's one thing to talk about these issues, but supporting those organizations is crucial. They're on the front lines making a real difference. This whole conversation has been really heavy,
It is heavy, but it's vital that we have these discussions. The more we, shed light on this issue, the less power it holds.
Yeah, it's heavy, but it's definitely important. And what I find so powerful about these deep dives?
Yeah. What's that?
They always leave me feeling more empowered, more informed,
Right.
and more connected to the bigger picture,
It's the power of knowledge, isn't it? The more we share that knowledge,
Right.
the more we can amplify,
Right.
those voices that are often silenced or overlooked.
And speaking of overlooked voices, I wanted to circle back to something we touched on earlier, those unique challenges faced by, autistic women and girls.
Right.
I know this is a topic that's been getting more attention lately,
Mhm.
Rightfully so. What are some of the, key things we need to be aware of in terms of how human trafficking might manifest differently for this group?
That's a really important point. Autistic women and girls often face this double layer of vulnerability. You have the challenges associated with, autism itself.
Right.
And then you add the societal pressures
Right.
and expectations placed on them,
Yeah.
as females. This can lead to some very specific forms of exploitation that might not be,
Yeah.
immediately obvious.
Can you give us some concrete examples? I'm having trouble picturing how that would actually play out.
Certainly. So one example is the exploitation of empathy.
Okay.
Autistic women and girls, despite often having difficulty with, with social cues, can be deeply empathetic individuals.
Right.
And this empathy can be exploited by traffickers who might present themselves as needing help or support and manipulating that desire to help into a situation of, control and abuse.
That's just awful. It's like they're being punished for their kindness,
Right.
for their willingness to see the good in others.
It really is it's a tragic manipulation of,
Yeah.
a beautiful trait. Another issue that's particularly relevant for autistic women and girls is the pressure to mask
Right.
or camouflage,
Yeah.
their autistic traits. And this can make it even harder for them to recognize and report abuse
Right.
because they may have, internalized the message that their authentic selves are somehow, flawed or unacceptable.
Right.
They might blame themselves for the abuse or feel ashamed to seek help.
That point about masking really hit home for me. I've read stories about, autistic women feeling pressured to hide their true selves, and it makes them more vulnerable to those who prey on people they perceive as weak or insecure.
It's a complex and deeply disturbing dynamic. And then
Yeah.
you have that added layer of societal sexism and misogyny,
Right.
which
Yeah.
can make it even harder for women and girls to be, you know,
Right.
believed and supported if they
Right.
do come forward.
It's like they're facing a system that's like stacked against them in so many ways. This is all so heavy, but I think it's incredibly important that we're having this conversation. It's easy to shy away from these difficult topics.
Mm.
But the more we bring them into the light,
Yeah.
the more we can start to like dismantle the systems that allow these, injustices to continue.
I couldn't agree more. Silence only benefits the, you know,
Yeah.
the perpetrators
Right.
by speaking out, by
Yeah.
raising awareness, by, educating ourselves and others. We can create change.
And I think that's a really powerful, powerful message to end on. Isn't not about feeling, overwhelmed or despairing. It's about channeling that knowledge into action, into hope, into a commitment to building a better world, for everyone. So if you're listening to this and you're feeling moved by what you've heard, don't just sit with that feeling. Go out there and do something with it.
Even a small action can have
Yeah.
a ripple effect.
Yeah.
Educate yourself. Talk to your friends and family.
Yeah.
Donate to an organization working to combat human trafficking.
Mm.
Be an advocate for autistic individuals in your community. Every little bit helps.
And remember, there are resources available if you or someone needs help. We'll be sure to include links to those organizations we mentioned. The National Autism Association, the Polaris Project,
Yeah.
and the Autistic Self-Advocacy Network in the show notes. You're not alone.
Right.
And there is hope.
Absolutely. And let's keep this conversation going. The more we talk about these issues, the less power they have over us,
Yeah.
you know.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and stay engaged.